Everyone knew him to be the school janitor until one day, when he saw an unsolvable math problem challenge on the board. Within hours, he had the answer.
This is correct. Who did this? Nimish?
No way.
Well, by no stretch of my imagination do I believe you've all come here to hear me lecture, or rather to ascertain the identity of the mystery math magician.
But when he provides a solution to yet another advanced math problem, the MIT professor is left in shock as he realizes that the illiterate school janitor might actually be a genius.
What do you do? Sorry. Looks right.
The story begins at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where Professor Gerald Lambeau is delivering a lecture on advanced mathematics. At the end of his class, he announces a special challenge for his graduate students as he writes a highly complex math problem on a board outside the classroom, and tells the students that whoever solves it will have their name published in the MIT Tech. He then emphasizes the difficulty of the problem, as he tells them that only top mathematicians have managed to solve such questions in the past. And to make it a fair challenge, he gives his students until the end of the semester. Meanwhile, we are introduced to a young janitor named Will Hunting who notices the problem while cleaning the hallways. Later that evening, he works on the equation at home, as he scribbles some formulas across his bathroom mirror, and by the following day, when no one else is around, Will picks up the chalk and confidently writes the solution to the problem on the board. It is then revealed how Will typically lives his life as we see him spend his free time drinking and joking around with his close friends Chucky, Billy, and Morgan. And during one of their outings, they go to a local baseball game, where Will spots a man who used to bully him in school. Wanting to get his revenge on the man, Will and his friends later confront the bully, and a fight breaks out. Will quickly overpowers the man, beating him relentlessly until his friends pull him away. But even when the police arrive to break up the fight, he lashes out at an officer, and this leads to his arrest. In the meantime, back at MIT, Professor Lambeau is shocked to hear that his challenge has already been solved. So, he rushes to the hallway to confirm, and there, he sees the completed solution. Curious, he asks his students if any of them are responsible, but no one admits to it. Word quickly spreads on campus, and the next class is filled with students who are all eager to see who the mysterious genius might be. But when the professor asks the individual to step up, no one comes out. So, the professor once again challenges them, and this time he posts a new problem, one he said took him 2 years to solve. Meanwhile, Will is let out from police custody and he returns to work where he finds the new problem and he immediately turns his attention to it. As he begins working on the board, Lambeau catches him in the act, as he assumes that he was playing on the board. But as the professor approaches, Will quickly runs away. However, when Lambeau returns to examine the board, he is shocked to find that the problem is fully solved. That is when he finally realizes that the unknown genius is none other than the janitor. That evening, as Will relaxes with his friends at a bar, they notice two beautiful girls around the corner, and Chucky tries to impress them by pretending he is also a student at MIT. So he claims that he attends the same class with them, but before he can get further, another man interrupts and starts questioning him about the classes. However, Chucky fumbles and the man immediately exposes his lies about attending classes with them, as he continues to humiliate Chucky by quizzing him on history. Unable to respond, Chucky remains silent, and just then, Will decides to step in as he immediately dismantles the man's argument with precision, as he cites facts and makes counterpoints with ease. When the man tries to respond, Will cuts him off and completes his entire sentence, exposing that he is merely repeating a passage from a textbook. In the end, Will mocks him for spending thousands of dollars on an education that could have been gained for free in a public library. This leaves the man humiliated, as he walks away in shame. Impressed by Will's intelligence, the girl who is called Skylar approaches him and gives him her phone number and even encourages him to call her later so they could hang out. To rub salt on injury on the man he had just humiliated, Will proudly flashes the number to him through the window just to taunt him. Meanwhile, Professor Lambeau is still trying to find out the real identity of the mysterious genius janitor that had solved his equations. So, he starts asking around, until he eventually gets some information on Will. He eventually attends Will's court hearing for assaulting the police officer, and while in court, Will represents himself as his own attorney. But in the end, the judge points out his extensive criminal record, filled with petty theft and violence. So, he tells him that he can no longer overlook his history, as he sentences Will to jail, and sets his bill at $50,000. However, days later, Lambeau immediately approaches Will in prison with an offer. He tells him that he has arranged with the judge to have Will out on parole only under two conditions. He must study mathematics under his guidance, and he must also attend counseling sessions. Although Will tries to mock the idea of therapy, he eventually reluctantly agrees, just to avoid serving jail time. Soon, Will begins working with Lambeau, and the professor is astounded by the young man's natural brilliance and feels proud of his progress. However, counseling sessions prove far more difficult as Will refuses to open up to any therapist. Instead, he spends nights reading their books and then ridicules them during sessions, as he uses his intelligence as a shield. And with his wit and sharp tongue, he pushes each counselor away, leaving Lambo with no one else to turn to. However, as a final attempt to rehabilitate the boy, Lambo reaches out to his old college roommate, Sean McGuire, who now teaches psychology at a community college. Initially, Sean declines, claiming he doesn't have the time. But when Lambo insists and explains that Will is a once-in-a-generation genius, and that with the right guidance, he could achieve greatness, Sean reluctantly agrees to the deal. When Will arrives for his first session, Sean insists that Lambo and his assistant leave the room. And when they were alone, Will reverted to his usual tactics as he quickly scans the shelves and starts mocking his book collection in an attempt to provoke him. Sean recognizes this immediately, and unlike the others, he doesn't rise to Will's bait. He understands that Will's behavior is a defense mechanism designed to push people away, so he maintains his composure and refuses to be drawn into the game. Instead, he engages him calmly and tries to speak casually without prying into his personal life, and for the first time, Will faces someone who doesn't react to his provocations. However, he soon notices a painting on the wall and he begins to analyze it. And instead of appreciating the work, he twists his interpretation into personal attacks as he makes a series of false assumptions about Sean's life and presents them as if they were facts. Sean remains calm through most of it, but when Will brings up his late wife and starts questioning her loyalty and suggesting she may have cheated on Sean, the man finally snaps. He grabs Will by the throat and warns him never to disrespect his wife ever again. In the end, Will smugly ends the session, believing he has broken yet another therapist. After he leaves, Lambo enters the room and immediately assumes that Sean will never want to see Will again after such a heated encounter. But to his surprise, Sean tells him that they will continue the session next week. In the meantime, Will goes on a date with Skylar. And during their evening together, he learns that she comes from a wealthy family and studies at Harvard. But despite their very different backgrounds, the two hit it off and end the night with a kiss. The following week, Will arrives at Sean's office, only for the man to take him to a park. They sit together on a bench, then Sean confesses to the boy that he has thought about his comments on his painting and that he has concluded that Will is just a young man pretending to know more than he does. And just as Will cannot truly understand someone's life from just reading his books, Sean admits he cannot fully understand Will from textbooks alone. He then tells Will that his silence to talk about himself stems from fear of what will happen if he opens up. But unless he chooses to talk, he will never experience the best parts of life. Outside therapy, Will continues his routine, riding with his friend Chucky to work at a construction site. And one day, when he attempts to call Skylar, he hesitates, as he starts to feel too insecure to go through with the conversation. Days later, during their third session, Will refuses to speak. But instead of forcing him, Sean also simply remains silent as the entire hour passes without a word. And their fourth session begins the same way until Will, out of boredom, cracks a joke. That is when Sean seizes the opening and asks about his personal life. Will admits he hasn't contacted Skylar since their date, as he believes she is too good for him and that he fears that if he continues the relationship, he will eventually ruin it. After listening to him, Sean responds by telling Will that no one is perfect and that the key to love isn't finding a flawless person, but finding someone who is perfect for you. To illustrate, he shares a personal story about his beloved wife. He tells Will that the woman he considered the most beautiful and perfect person he had ever met used to fart in her sleep. The honesty of this confession shifts the tone entirely as both Sean and Will break into uncontrollable laughter, and this eventually marks a turning point in their relationship. So, Will begins to feel more at ease around Sean and their bond begins to grow. One day, Sean advises him to stop thinking about whether Skylar is out of his league and instead, he should ask himself whether they could truly be happy together. Will becomes so absorbed in these words that he doesn't even notice the session has ended until Sean points it out. Encouraged by the words, Will visits Skylar at her dorm and asks her out again. She was willing to accept, but then, she tells him that she has a complicated academic problem to solve, one that could take hours or even days. But he soon realizes that he cannot wait anymore. So, he quickly solves the problem on a napkin and hands it to her. And with the matter now settled, the two head out for their date. As they spend time together, Skylar asks about his family and Will lies, claiming he has 12 brothers. To test him, she asks him to name each one. Without hesitation, Will lists 12 random names, and even when she asks him to repeat them, he easily recites the names in the exact same order. At his next therapy session, Will asks Sean whether he ever regretted meeting his wife, since her death has left him with so much pain. In response, Sean shares the story of how they met. He recalls that he was waiting in line with his friends for tickets to what would become one of the most iconic baseball games in history. Will grows excited after hearing this, thinking Sean had watched the game live, so he presses for more details. Sean describes the game vividly, but then reveals he never actually saw it in person as he had given up his ticket that night to take out a girl he had just met, the woman who later became his wife. Will is stunned that Sean would sacrifice a chance to see such a legendary moment. But Sean explains he has never once regretted missing that game, and certainly never regretted meeting and loving his wife, even though their time together was brief. In the meantime, Skylar starts to push Will to introduce her to his family. But he still doesn't want to reveal the truth to her yet, as he agrees to let her meet his friends instead. The group eventually gathers at a bar, and Skylar quickly fits in. She laughs, jokes, and enjoys their company as she immediately wins them over with ease. But while Will's personal life seems to be moving forward, Professor Lambeau remains focused on his academic potential. He is curious about his progress, so he visits Sean to ask how the sessions are going. Sean explains that Will has started to open up, though slowly, but he believes it will take more time before Will is fully comfortable confronting his fears and trusting others. Lambeau then reveals that he has already arranged interviews for Will at some of the top mathematics institutes. He believes that once Will overcomes his emotional barriers, nothing will stand in the way of him building a remarkable career in the world of mathematics. However, Sean argues that they should not be the ones deciding Will's future because he believes that the boy ought to be supported in choosing his own path. But Professor Lambeau refuses to let Will's talent go unused, insisting that opportunities in mathematics are too valuable to waste. But Will, however, has no interest in these prestigious jobs, and instead of attending the interview, he sends his friend Chucky in his place, as they treat the situation as a joke. Meanwhile, Will's relationship with Skylar soon starts to grow complicated, and during a private moment together, she asks him to move with her to California. But the very thought terrifies him, and he immediately rejects the idea. But Skylar presses him, as she asks if he is so afraid of commitment and why he continues to lie about his past. Feeling cornered, Will finally reveals the truth as he tells her that he grew up as an orphan, and that he was passed from one foster family to another. Many of those years were filled with abuse, including beatings from his foster parents. The confession shakes Skylar, who breaks down in tears and tells him that she wants to be with him and help. But Will pushes her away, as he tells her that he doesn't need anyone. At that moment, his fear of abandonment becomes clear as he believes that anyone he loves will eventually leave him. However, even at this, Skylar insists she will never walk away, but Will eventually tells her that he doesn't love her, as he leaves her crying in her room. Days later, after Lambeau warns him against not attending the interviews he had set up for him, Will finally agrees to attend one of the job interviews at NASA. But although he shows up, he deliberately sabotages his chances, as he makes no attempt to get hired. And during his next session with Sean, the therapist asks who he trusts most in the world. Will answers without hesitation, Chucky. Sean eventually acknowledges Chucky's loyalty to him, but then he reminds Will that even his best friend cannot understand the depth of his struggles. He challenges Will about his future, as he asks him how he plans to survive in the coming years. The boy simply insists that he will remain in Boston, and that he will work at construction for the rest of his life. But Sean quickly confronts him, as he tells him that he knows that the fear of leaving his comfort zone is what is holding him back from living fully. He also tells him that he will not demand that he accept Lambeau's job offers. Instead, he asks Will what he truly wants out of life. Ever playful, Will replies with sarcasm, as he tells him that he wants to be a shepherd. Realizing Will is not being serious, Sean loses patience and tells him to leave, as he does not intend to waste his time if he cannot be honest with him. But Will soon grows angry, and he starts shouting at Sean. However, when he is pressed again about what he wants in life, Will remains silent. So, Sean dismisses him from the session. Days later, as Skylar prepares to leave for California, Will calls her to say goodbye. But when she confesses once again that she loves him, hoping that they could get back together, Will could only smile as he does not want to say it back, still trapped by his fear of heartbreak. But one day, as he works at the construction site with Chucky, Will admits he has no intention of pursuing a career. He reveals he ended things with Skylar and plans to stay in Boston forever, working construction and living next door to his best friend. On hearing this, Chucky finally speaks his mind. He admits that it hurts him to watch his best friend waste his potential, as he tells Will that while he enjoys their friendship, he only has one wish for him. Every morning when he arrives to pick Will up, he hopes that one day, he won't be there, and that deep down in his heart, he wants Will to leave behind his stagnant life and do something meaningful in life. In the meantime, Professor Lambeau and Sean clash over Will's future as Lambeau starts to grow frustrated that Sean hasn't convinced him to pursue a career, arguing that Will's intelligence must not go unused. But Sean disagrees with him, as he is still of the opinion that the boy should not be rushed into life-changing decisions before he knows what he truly wants. He also tells Lambeau that Will's fear of abandonment has always caused him to push people away, and forcing him into a career could make him become resentful once more. Sean believes they should support Will's choices, no matter what path he takes. However, Lambeau refuses to accept this. He warns Sean not to let Will believe it's acceptable to waste his gifts. As their arguments escalate and in the heat of the moment, Lambo accuses Sean of being jealous of his success. But Sean fires back, saying he never wanted Lambo's life in the first place. At that moment, Will enters the room as he overhears the heated exchange as Lambo quietly exits the room, leaving Sean and Will to continue their session. Sean eventually pulls out a file containing photographs of Will's battered body from his foster years as he asks if Will has ever seen anything like it before. Sean then reveals that his own father was also an abusive alcoholic who often beat him and his mother. Hearing this, Will recalls the violence he had to endure under his foster father. That is when Sean steps closer and tells Will that none of it was his fault. But Will brushes it off, insisting he already knows. But even at this, Sean repeats the phrase again and again, urging him to accept it. Will grows emotional, resisting at first, before finally breaking down in tears as he hugs Sean tightly and cries uncontrollably. For the first time, he allows himself to release the pain of his past. With this breakthrough, Will tells Sean he is ready to move forward and that he plans to take one of the job opportunities Lambo has lined up for him. Their final session ends with Will asking if they can remain in touch. Sean assures him he will always be there and encourages him to follow his heart as the two embrace before parting ways. Soon after, Chucky, Billy, and Morgan surprise Will with a car for his 21st birthday. And even though the car is not new, Will treasures it very much since it comes from his closest friends. At about that same time, Lambo visits Sean to apologize for his harsh words and the two men reconcile, as Sean reveals that he plans to go on a long vacation and travel around the world. But as he prepares for his trip, Will stops by his house. And without going inside, he leaves a letter in the mailbox before driving off. The next morning, Chucky arrives at Will's house to pick him up. However, after knocking with no response, he peers through the window and realizes the house is empty. Then he smiles as realization dawns on him, and he understands that his friend has finally taken control of his life. Then, we see that Sean eventually finds the letter in the mailbox and in it, Will writes that he isn't accepting the job after all. Instead, he's heading to California to reunite with Skylar. After reading the note, Sean smiles warmly before heading back inside. And in the closing scene, we see Will driving west, with a determination to follow his heart and start a new chapter with Skylar. And that is the recap of the movie, Good Will Hunting. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more movie recaps like this on this channel, leave a comment for us and also drop a like on the video. Thanks for watching.